To all our friends, viewers, followers, fellow movers for real democracy and development, Filipinos here and abroad. Maayong buntag, mapia kapipita, marhay na aga, mayap ayabak, maupay nga aga, maayong aga, magandang umaga, good morning everyone. I'm pretty excited with this Sunday's episode. To be honest, when we were planning about it, I had to uh, not reread, but actually read about AI. It's pretty new, especially in the Philippines. But I understand, of course, in my readings that it's been there for a while and it's been in use in different sectors, so particularly in government in some countries. But how much do we know of it, and how much is it exactly useful as far as our day-to-day lives are concerned? I'm an academic myself, and at first, I'm still quite hesitant, admittedly, to really, embrace AI, so to speak, especially when it comes to students submitting papers claiming that these are their work, and when you get to check it and make sense whether or not it's actually the work of every student. And as a professor, of course, whether a paper actually reflects the student's performance while in class. So given that, I don't know how we can really make good use of AI now that it's already here. I was still in elementary grade when we started watching, sci-fi movies and reading sci-fi novels, saying that eventually computers will take over and so on and so forth. I don't know if it's already starting there and whether someone will be sent from the future and come in and stop all these developments happening. But the good thing is that we have experts with us to help us understand, more of these. We have no less than someone who actually knows how things are going in the other side of the world, a very good friend of mine, and of course a member of our group, a peer himself, Dr. Sven Herpig, who is no less than a scholar and consultant in the Federal Ministry of Defense in Germany and even in the US Congress. I will not say more of his background. I will just allow him to greet first. Magandang umaga. Good morning, Sven.
Good morning, Ed. Good to be here today.
I'm glad that you can find time for us this morning. I understand, of course, the time difference, and it's always a challenge, when we get to invite you. I'm honored to introduce as well. I have to say, someone who really has to be invited when it comes to these issues. The whole time I was trying to figure out sino ba ang pwede naming imbitahan, para mapag-usapan ito. And it's a good thing that I was told of the background of our guest. The former president and current board member of the Philippine Institute of Cybersecurity Professionals. Pangalan pa lang medyo nanginginig na ako, no? He's also a former AVP and head of cyber security strategy and innovation of PLDT and SMART. He's a member of the Philippine Military Academy class of 1999 and a former Air Force pilot. My goodness, say hello to Maverick. And he's also a former member of the House of Representatives during the 16th Congress and a professor in the Asian Institute of Management. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome former Congressman Ashley Asidilio. Kong Ace.
Thank you, Ed, for the very generous introduction, and good morning to you. Good morning, Sven. Looking forward to our discussion today.
All right, so let's get right into it. We only have a few minutes for this purpose, and I'm sure this is not going to be the first and last. So as the first episode on artificial intelligence, perhaps we can start by understanding what is it really about. Why do we call it? Well, of course, we know why we call it artificial intelligence. Especially when I'm dealing with policymakers, I'm sure I find it kind of amusing. Yeah, that there's even this meeting of an office, no, and I couldn't help but uh, amusement is not even enough a term to describe it, but policymaking authority is definitely not executive a function. So if we're talking of artificial intelligence, I wonder whether it can apply to, natural intelligence, because so many people, especially those who make crucial decisions, need intelligence. Kung is my goodness. So I can't help but, find it amusing to ask whether artificial intelligence could help in some way in this regard. But first off, of course, let's understand it. What's artificial intelligence, and how do we make good use for it in our day-to-day lives? So perhaps we can start with Pierce Ben in that regard.
Thank you, Ed. I think in general, you just mentioned human intelligence, right? We have two things that we call general artificial intelligence and narrow artificial intelligence. General is like what you would understand, like coming close to human intelligence, different tasks can make different decisions. And narrow artificial intelligence or some machine learning based software, that's what we currently have. But what is that? I mean, it's the most basic understanding. It's software that has the ability to learn and make decisions and generate stuff for us. So you will know it from, for example, ChatGPT or Gemini. You can ask it a question, it gives you answers. And if you give it slightly different questions, or if you tweak your question, if you ask it again, it will give you different answers. That's one very important characteristic of that. You can ask for image creation. You can ask for to help you with facial recognition. There's a lot of use cases ranging from something that helps you in the day-to-day work, if you want to create memes on the internet, if you want to create a better academic paper, towards more, let's say, safety critical operations, where you move into measurements for critical infrastructures, where you move into surveillance and reconnaissance improvements, or at the core of national security issues like the controls of military drones, for example. And what do you need for that? So basically, again, in very simple terms, you have a bunch of data. Think of pictures of cats and pictures of dogs, for example, for something that should tell you the difference between these two animals. And then you have a classifier or regressor, or let's just call it an algorithm. And you feed that data, you label it first, you say it's a cat, it's a dog, for example. You feed it into the algorithm learns, and then you deploy it somewhere. So start it, and then you can access it, and you can say, hey, you have a picture here. Is it a rather dog or rather a cat? Like very simple terms. So you need computing power, much computing power to run that. And you need, for most cases of these algorithms, a lot of data and a lot of high quality data. So these are the two things that you normally would need. You create this kind of algorithm, and then it can help you from augmenting your day-to-day work and going to critical issues such as national security.
So we're becoming quite dependent on it, Sven, so to speak. The way you describe it, it's as if, if I'm an engineer, for example, and I'd like to do some measurements in the, I don't know, this morning I woke up in the wrong side of the bed and I don't feel like doing it. So there are some measures or facilities that I can ask AI to do my job, so to speak.
Well, we're definitely becoming more dependent on it, but saying we're becoming dependent on it is like saying we're becoming independent on computers. We're already dependent on that, and there's like so many different applications where machine learning plays a role that more and more it will creep into your daily life without you even knowing. I mean, we have, like, when you get emails that you don't want, they land in spam folders, right? And you wondered, like people that are as old as us wondered why it got so much better in the last 20 years. One of the reasons why it got so much better in filtering out the important emails, giving them to us and put the rest away, is because that's one of the classic use cases of machine learning in spam filtering. So did you know that? No, you're already dependent on that, because otherwise your email box would be flooded more than it already is.
it seems the way you describe it, like it's that the computers are more advanced than people. No, in my experience, no, especially when you get to meet a lot of people, and not many of them are, I have to say, acceptable, and they don't even also find you acceptable. But you don't have that facility, to somehow classify them into spam people and acceptable people, and so on and so forth. I'm sorry, but sometimes it's difficult to try to apply it in some sense. But in the case of the Philippines, Kong Ace, are we already in that kind of stage? Are so much of work that we do actually already incorporate the same stage of use of AI?
Well, my difficulty in answering your question, Ed, is that we don't have official statistics in the Philippines.
Yun na
But
nga.
by way of comparison, okay, just to answer your question indirectly, by way of comparison, there's this very interesting article recently from The Economist, and they're actually tracking the uptake of AI across highly industrialized nations, OECD nations, as they call them. So you're talking about UK, the US, and Canada.
Uh-huh.
Nowhere across the industries in these three countries has the figure hit in the upper 20s. At most, it's at 20% uptake, right? So there's the low of 5% in Canada, and then there's 15% in the UK, and around 20% of companies surveyed uh, by The Economist are answering to the question, uh, have you integrated AI into your business and in your operations in various ways? And it's not even specific; it's a very general thing. No, so they could probably have introduced AI in a very narrow, specific sense, or that they're using AI even in business decision making. So it could be across that range, no? And their answer is not even in the high 20s. So by analogy, I would say that it would even be lower here in the
Yeah.
Philippines. And there are, I think, across all these countries, there are common reasons why AI's uptake is not yet very high. And we can talk about them quickly. But I'd like uh, just to reinforce the earlier points of Sven. And this came up during the congressional hearings, Ed. No? There was a very good point from a congressman that he said when he said that, a lot of people, especially when they do marketing about their products, they would say that it has features of AI and all that. And he correctly
Exactly.
pointed out that he said, no, it's not necessarily AI. It doesn't mean that it has features of ICT, that it has AI. For it to qualify as being AI driven, it should feature the three things that Sven already mentioned. It requires compute resources.
Uh-huh.
Second, it's powered by an algorithm, the if and a series of if and then statements that drives its logic. And third, it's powered by a large mass of data. Hence the need for the first one, large compute resources. And
Mm.
uh, and we're only scraping the tip right now, especially when we talk about AI. What always comes to mind is ChatGPT, and that only belongs to a very narrow aspect of AI, which is generative AI. And when we talk of AI across the broad spectrum, you have three types. You have general AI, where ChatGPT belongs and large language models belong, and we have those that are being driven towards yet. I don't know if Sven, maybe he has better knowledge of this. I can't speak of yet of any technology right now that approximates AGI or what we call artificial general intelligence, intelligence that approximates human intelligence already. And the third one, this is the scarier one, or the scariest one, I should say, super artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence that has exceeded human capabilities already. So we're very far, I think, for the second and the third type. We're only on the first type. Yet, going back to your question about where we are right now, think about this. When you think about AI, and think about it this way: if the tech titans of the world, the Elon Musk, the Steve Wozniaks, uh, even Stephen Hawking, and thousands of them have openly written a letter calling on all governments of the world to pause, and this was March last year. This was a published letter, open letter, calling on all governments of the world to stop, to pause at least for 6 months, what they call black box AI research. And we can discuss that later. To take a pause because governments and regulations have not yet caught up to the developments of AI right now. So I'll stop there.
You know, that means we're really very far from, you know, wherever the first the industrialized countries have already gone to. And I don't know whether this is a disadvantage or an advantage. It's probably both. But perhaps we can learn from some of the mistakes that have been taken already by governments that have already incorporated AI in, you know, the day-to-day work that not only the government does, but, you know, the reason why we call it governance in the first place is because when we say government, when we say policy making, when we say policy implementation and programs and so on and so forth, it's not just plain limited to government agencies. It's now involving private sector and private individuals and so on and so forth. But, you know, the challenge in the Philippines is actually more basic as far as not only AI, but in terms of infrastructure and in terms of governmental organization or capacity for that matter. No, so anyway, having said that, it seems that it's not just an issue of policy. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sven. No, but I suppose, of course, considering that you know, I just watched the Born series again, no, and there was this talk about was this deep dream, no? You see, my phone is even talking to me. No, it's I was supposed to have it silenced already. So, you know, what I'm saying now is how secure is I don't know whether to call it AI, Sven, or simply technology for that matter, because you don't only just provide your details. When you even open an email address, it asks personal details and so on and so forth. But phones now require your facial recognition, your thumbprint, and so on and so. That all goes to the cloud, no, and it becomes accessible to practically anyone. So I suppose, of course, these are the basic what's this purposes of policy and regulation, no, in by governments for that matter. But I have to ask you, where do we start and where does it end? Because definitely it's not like we can trust the private companies entirely in the first place, but the same way we can't trust the governments entirely. And in today's day and age, I'm not even sure if there's a clear distinction between the private sector, between the corporation and the government, especially in countries where, of course, obviously, it's not as democratic as we understand. No, not only in the Philippines, but more so in advanced democracies. So, how does government get into you know, making sure that we use AI in to our, really to the people's advantage, to society's advantage, no, and not only maximizing its use, but making sure it's secure. So how do we get to that?
It's a very broad question. I mean, let me start by giving you like 2 minutes on the where are we coming from. So you think like AI or machine learning is something very new, right? We all think like, oh, it just came up the last few years. But it didn't. It started in the 50s. In the 50s, there were the first games of checkers and chess were machine learning powered, supported. We went through some what we call AI winters, where the research and the development on AI stopped for years on end for different reasons. For example, there was not enough computing power. There was not enough data sets available, so you can't train. Then funding dried up because no progress, no funding, and then it's a self-fulfilling circle. And started again another AI winter for similar reasons. And then 2015 was for many the moment where everyone was like, oh wow. And that was again, to stick with the game metaphor, when the machine learning AlphaGo won a game against a professional Go player. And Go, I'm not super familiar with the game, but apparently it's super much more complex than checkers or chess in terms of strategies and gameplay. So that signifies a complete new step. And that's when governments were like, so maybe we should start doing something about it. And
So it
I
was
think
private sector initiative, Sven. So I mean, the internet started with for military purpose, if I'm not mistaken. No. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, it was started by the private sector. Did I get it right?
it was researchers. It was in the research, and not necessarily in the military research, unless you need checkers and chess for military research, which can be true, but sometimes it's also a bit mixed of that. But it came truly from the research community. Um, and 2015 roughly was in the aha moment for many governments. Say, okay, well, we have to look into regulating it and how to look at it. And if you look at for example, the track record of the European Union, we started then with talking about AI ethics at a topic that's much more aligned with you than it is with me, to be honestly. And then we moved slowly towards AI safety. So AI ethics is how should it behave. Then AI safety is how should it behave and then doesn't do harm, right? But we have to move to answer your question. This is okay. This is also a good pace for governments, at least in the European Union, I have to say, if you look at the years. But we are still very far from security. And that's the main issue that we're having right now, is that, yes, you can talk about AI safety, but you don't have the time to talk about non-adversarial settings. Because our adversaries, uh, look at China, for example,
Uh-huh.
they will exploit weaknesses in those systems. So we have to look at security and resilience of those systems. So you have to start now, and you have to start the whole picture. How can we ethically develop it and use it, and safely, but also securely? And how are we being resilient in the future when things go sideways? Because things will go sideways. And then allow me one last thing. The governments have not much power over it. I mean, the European Union as a group of governments, of course, you see that with the General Data Protection Regulation, have power. But otherwise, it's the researchers and especially the industry, such as Microsoft, such as Google, that push AI research and applications. They are the ones who are normally setting the rules. And if you're a smaller government or a couple of smaller governments, of course you can dictate the rules by which your agencies can use them. You can dictate within your country what data can be saved and whatnot. But in the end of the day, you will need a lot of talent. You will need also your own industry, and you will need connections to the big companies to talk to them and to figure out what you can do about governance and where's actually the small piece that you can govern as a government. And you have to look at across the ethics, safety, security, resilience standard to get some resemblance of security in the future.
My goodness, I don't know where to start imagining as far as the Philippines is concerned in this regard, Kong Age, no? But I suppose it requires so much, well, as Sven mentioned, the talent. I'm not going to ask, are we there yet? I will just ask uh, if at all there are already initiatives in that regard, at least in the private sector, to understand more about it, so that uh, at the end of the day, it's already a given. I mean, it's not only the Filipinos who know that there's so much to be had as far as our government is concerned. And I mean, when I started advocating for system reform, I was like, my hair was still kind of dark, and I was more active in everything. And now I'm no longer as astute as that, but it's still being talked about. And now we have AI. No, so I don't know what exactly to ask you, but in 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 terms of understanding AI, do we have at least not enough, but I suppose we have already started learning about it in the private sector. And if the private sector has been working with the government and vice versa, if the government is aware at all, no, that there is a need now for us to actually make sense of it and make good use of it to our advantage. I mean, there's so many reasons, not only because of China, not only because of threats in practically everywhere, but mainly because we'd like to use it to our advantage so that services can be better and so on and so forth. So how much are we doing so far? Doon na lang, yun na lang yung tanong ko. How much are we doing now? I mean, in terms of private sector initiative and government, where is what additional initiatives can still be done so that both sectors can actually work together? I I think you're muted, Kong Ace.
I'll answer that first from a general context,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
especially within the power dynamics, no, between government, private sector, and the academe. It used to be, especially shortly after World War II, no, that uh, most of the most of the leading edge research in science and technology was, if not driven by government, at least largely funded by government, and a large part of the brain power came from the universities and the academe. Uh, and the private sector also, if they had capital and they had capital to spend, they would still rely on the academe. Now, even the power dynamics has changed insofar as AI is concerned. It's now wholly and largely driven by private sector entities pouring in a lot of resources into research, so in the hopes of bringing them to market at speed. I'll give you a very telltale statistic. For this year, 2024, it is estimated that $400 billion will be spent by only five companies, the big five they call them:
Wow.
Meta, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and I forgot the fifth one. Uh, so I mention Facebook? Yeah, Facebook,
Yeah.
Meta, uh, or they're the
Magkano
same.
pa din yung
Google,
Facebook?
Amazon, okay. Uh, so the five of them will be spending across them $400 billion just for the five of them. And this tells you where the action is in terms of AI. In terms of AI, so what the government now, whether it's regulation or research and development, is playing catch up. I would say the same in the particular case of the Philippines. You were asking what our government's been doing so far. I'm glad that an agency of government has taken the lead insofar as AI strategy and policy is concerned. I'm happy to say that DTI is taking the lead. In fact, in 2022, it issued a paper, and rightly so, identifying that there are 10 million jobs in the Philippines at risk. So these are manufacturing jobs, service jobs, and agricultural jobs. And it's an important statistic to remember because our government, with a population of 110 million across the Philippines, should be mindful of the danger of the obsolescence of our human capital, which we have a lot of available. And many of these we are relying upon. We pride ourselves with the most number of BPO seats, a title which India gladly relinquished to the Philippines simply because they moved up the value chain instead of just um, contenting themselves with back office jobs. They moved up to software development and many others, right? So if we don't think of it along those lines, and we are encouraging the uptake of AI across our industry and in government, we may unwittingly kick our people out of their jobs if we do not also put the policy in place and the investments in place to reskill and upskill them. So, and not only that, may I add as well the current efforts in Congress, especially the lower house. There are now five pending bills in the lower house, and I would imagine a smaller number in the Senate pending as well, calling for the creation of a regulating body to not just to regulate but also to promote the use of AI. And I specifically favor a version which would bring in not just industry, not just the academe, not just labor, not just but also the national security community. But because I also believe I'm one of those that belong to that school of thought that AI is also an emerging threat,
Mhm, mhm,
not just in cybersecurity, but from from the perspective of lethal autonomous weapons and many
mhm,
others.
mhm.
I see AI posing systemic risks, the risk of rogue AI, and the risk of bad actors using AI across
So
those
in
three
other
general
words,
categories.
the sci-fi movies I was talking about earlier somehow is already here and now, no? And well, but we're not necessarily lacking talent, Kong Ace, no? I still believe that Filipinos have the intellectual capacity to understand all these, no? But I suppose it's the academe that should be providing that kind of atmosphere, so to speak. So you're teaching in AIM and you're into that sector, so to speak. So you think somehow, at the very least, we have already, I mean, universities, the academia have already started contributing to toward this end?
Um, we don't have to look very far, Ed, no? You look at before China overtook Japan as the number two economy in the world, when the US and Japan were number one and number two the economies in the world, you would see that there were similar approaches to them. These were already very powerful countries before the advent of World War II and shortly after World War II, except that, Japan was in ruins. They had a very purposeful policy and government investment in research and development. And this powered their industries, and this allowed the academe to contribute as well. Um, so we can't simply just bank on the fact that we have a large pool of human capital. We can't just rely on the fact that we have enterprising companies. Uh, we can't just rely on the academe to take up the mantle of teaching and reskilling our people. I think it really all starts from a very specific, a very driven policy by government. One, to promote research and development, and to to raise the level of education of our people, and not just any other courses. We are now looking at more focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because these are the subjects, or these are the fields that will be driving not only the industries and the jobs of the future, but also our way of life, basically, will be defined largely by STEM: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Wow. So really, there's so much work to do, no, in that regard. And I have to add, Kong Ace, that when AI is application, basically, no, uh, and as an application, it has to be understood not only from the perspective of technology, from the perspective of engineering, but it has to be understood in the context of the social sciences, no, how it's put to good use in society, and how it is translated into regulations, and therefore legal scholars and policymakers have to really understand this, and so on and so forth. And so I I, I have to ask Ben, no, in this regard, no, um, when we speak of AI, to my mind, it's not only akin, but it's always connected to cybersecurity. No, I mean, I'm always hesitant to use technology that requires facial recognition, and so on and so forth. Can you at least advise me if I'm doing it right? Should I be hesitant? And if I shouldn't be, why not? No. What are therefore the dangers of AI when it comes to? We're not even talking of national security in this regard. We're just talking of individual security. So, uh, what are the pros and cons? How do we really make good use of it without sacrificing security?
I'll give quick 2 points, Ed, and then I'll switch back to Sven, and he can add more.
Yun
Just
lang,
two
yeah.
quick points on your question on the impact of AI in cybersecurity. I think right now the more realistic scenario in terms of the danger of AI and what it poses in cybersecurity is first in terms of the deepfakes, no? Many many security features that uh, are being used right now can be subverted by the use of AI, especially, for example, facial recognition. Research from MIT states that a positive statement of MIT is that they only need five composite images, still images of a person, in order to create a viable deep fake video. Okay,
Oh
so
my.
that's very dangerous, right? Especially if some security countermeasures are put in place requiring facial recognition. I spoke to two global cybersecurity research companies, and I asked them, do you actually know, or can you identify, have you seen, in fact, an end-to-end cyber attack which is powered by AI? And their answer was an unequivocal no. There still is a need for a hands on the keyboard for in order to at least launch a cyber attack and maybe escalate that cyber attack. It cannot be done end to end just by using AI. However, uh, a, a quick point, and I'll switch back to Sven after this, is the democratization of hacking tools by way of AI. There's now fraud GPT. This allows people without any programming background, without any hacking skills, to be able to access uh, hacking materials. Not
My
only
goodness.
that, the cybercrime landscape is a very disaggregated and very sophisticated industry. There are now people developing malware. There are now people specializing in delivering malware, and then there are people also specializing in negotiations for ransomware, for example. So okay, I'll stop there, and then I'll switch back to Sven. Sven?
What can you say in that regard? I'm getting scared. It's as if I
I'm,
went back to analog.
yeah. I mean, the first thing you have to understand is in terms of who's gonna conduct cyber operations against us. Yes, on one end, it's cyber criminals. And cyber criminals are lazy. They want to make as much money as possible with as few work as possible. So if they can compromise data, if you can ransom businesses and so on, without any machine learning software in the way, they will do that. And they can do that. There's no reason for them to specialize on hacking AI systems because they get in your systems without that. Second stakeholder that's normally interested in that are intelligence agencies, right? And for them, it's very similar. They don't care how they get in your system. They want to get in your system the easiest way, undetected, and stay there as long as possible. And if they can do that without hacking any AI-enabled software, they will do that. And they do that currently. So from that side, we are still lucky enough that machine learning powered software is not targeted because it doesn't need to be targeted. No. So we still have time to secure it. The downside is we haven't even secured our conventional IT systems. What do we think how long it will take us to secure our machine learning powered software? But let me do three things on the intersection of cybersecurity and AI. One is, as Ace already mentioned, we're going to use tools such as generative AI, ChatGPT, or image creators, or so on, to enable us to make better phishing attacks, to convince you to click on links, to infect your computer. It doesn't change a lot in terms of quality, but they can do it faster. They could do the same messages with much more time, or they do badly crafted messages, but for example, ChatGPT allows them to craft the messages and get you compromised faster. So it's a term of efficiency, right? Not yet in terms of quality. Also malware production. Yes, I don't know anything. I can go and I can have an LLM or something write me a malware, but that's not high quality malware. You know, everyone, you can buy that for $5 in the underground. It's nothing substantially new. Okay. Second factor is machine learning applications to improve my IT security, like software tools that help me detect anomalies in my network. Yes, they exist. Yes, they are getting better. So we have to be on the lookout for that, and that can help us to improve overall security levels. But also, they also fail. So it's not like the holy grail of making us all secure, right? But there's this. And this is the third aspect, which we have talked about. Ace, you just mentioned rogue AI, the security aspect of machine learning, right? And that goes as far as, yeah, we can compromise it. And the problem is, why do we use machine learning? Because it makes our life simpler, it scales, and it automates things. So if these things are compromised, then also everything that makes our life easier makes them more difficult. And the bad things that happen are also at scale and automatization doing bad things to us, critical infrastructures, and so on and so forth. And the other aspect of that is, the problem is that machine learning software also drives software design decisions. Look at Microsoft's Recall, where Microsoft announced, hey, let's do a new tool which basically takes screenshots of your computer screen every couple of seconds, and then we do something with it so we can power our machine learning software better. And then we're like, okay, but if your computer is compromised, then everyone who compromised your computer has access to all the screenshots, including your passwords, your banking data, whatever you browsed on, porn, whatever, right? Which they wouldn't have without that design decision. So there's a second order effect of why machine learning makes us less secure in that regard. And I leave you at that. So there's a lot of things that go in the intersection, but I want to end on a positive note. If, for example, you look at, we talked about reskilling, right? We currently have millions of job openings for cybersecurity professionals, which are not filled. These job openings will increase with increased digitization, including the digitization we are looking at through machine learning. So if you want to reskill your workforce, you can at least reskill 1 to 2 million into cybersecurity professionals. And you do not need a PhD for that. You do a 3-year apprenticeship. We don't need more people with PhDs on cybersecurity. That's not going to really help us secure infrastructure. We need people who can configure firewalls, who can follow simple procedures, who can update things. That's what we need, at least everywhere in the West. But as far as I know, also China doesn't have enough talent to fill the holes in their talent pipeline on cybersecurity professionals. So if you want to make good use of that and reskill people, this is an area you can at least put a couple of 100,000 people. And as far as I know, cybersecurity and hackers are pretty good in the Philippines. So maybe that's a good way to go, at least for some universities or applied universities in your region.
Oh, at least that gave me hope, Kong Ace. I have to say, no, I mean, but I will throw this to the both of you. So we'll just jump in, no, if you have anything particular to say. We use smartphones now, and of course, precisely because of you buy stuff online, and again, smartphones require facial recognition and so many things and so on. In other words, to make a long story short, anyone interested, especially if a particular government is interested at making sense of how, sige na, I'll be more specific. If there's a country that's interested in the Philippines, what I will do as a government is to make sense of how the people behave. What is it exactly that interests them? I mean, what kind of movies do they watch? What kind of food do they eat? What kind of material do they read? If they read at all, no? And how they, I mean, which political personality or which political leader is or are popular, and so on and so forth, and how we can exploit this to our advantage, and so on and so forth. Is this already happening? I mean, regardless of whichever country is doing it, whether against the Philippines or against another country, I'm sure, of course, well, I heard a lot about how Trump was elected, and I've read this in some books before. But specifically, how advanced, no, is technology now, which includes AI, that allows practically all this, that wars literally has changed. No, it's no longer going to be started and won by way of bullets, but simply by way of technology. No, is this already happening? And again, how do we secure ourselves in this regard?
Okay, quite a wide range, if you're able to answer that. But I'd like to take off from an earlier point raised by Sven about uh, ethics in AI, and I would encompass that within the topic of ethics in technology. I teach that at AIM because I've always believed that that was lacking in the earlier approaches to technology management. I've always told my students that uh, technology is never uh, it's never a neutral ground. It's either ethical or unethical. So you design if you're lazy, again using a word of Sven earlier, if you're lazy in your practices, that is inherently unethical. I'll give an example. Um, we ask why are our software or why are our networks so insecure? Have they always been like that? Well, yeah, probably the answer is yes. Why? Because of two things. One, uh, the propensity for going to market as quickly as possible, and two, the onus given to functionality rather than security. Security is always a afterthought. So these two things inherently make our ICTs or our information communications technologies inherently insecure. So that in itself, to me, is a question of ethics, and it is unethical. Therefore, the other side of the coin is that in order for you to be able to observe and practice ethics in technology, you have to, by design, secure your hardware, your software. Uh, in take that for example to privacy versus security. If you sway too much on the side of security, you inherently make your technologies uh, open to a lot of privacy violations. You can see this in massive surveillance and police states like China and the like. No, um, in fact, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Federal uh, Communications Commission of the U.S., are both agencies that have taken an active role in banning certain companies that have enabled such uh, human rights abuses using technology. So again, that is another example where technology can be unethical. So given that backdrop, uh, you now go to the applications of technology in warfare. I always believe that um, if we are to integrate AI into our weapon systems, we should never make the mistake of making our weapon systems fully autonomous, because that already removes the concept of accountability. We
Yeah.
believe post World War II that that mankind has not yet solved the bane of warfare. And as such, we have only managed to at least scale down or at least introduce some humanity in war, which is almost next to impossible. They said that after World War II, wars will be more humane. You only have to look at our history for the last 80 or so years after World War II. We have failed in that regard. We have still managed to mount carnage after carnage, which would make any angel weep, right? So, in my contention is, since our topic is AI, we should never make our weapon systems fully autonomous simply because that will only exacerbate the problem of violence and the lack of accountability.
Let me let me pick that.
the good
Ed, allow
thing in
me.
this discussion, the good thing in this discussion, before you jump in, Sven, the good thing in this discussion is that, again, any one of you can correct me if I'm wrong. Even if we're behind now here in the Philippines, there's every possibility and every chance for us to catch up and even use technology to our advantage and somehow counter, any efforts against us. At least that's my takeaway now. No, so again, going back to that question, Sven. No, so am I right in assuming that precisely with all this data and as you've mentioned, it's easily used by artificial intelligence. So much can be done now by any party that wants to do something against a country or against a person.
Let me first pick up on 2 points that Ace just made, and then go back to that. First of all, you will. So I'm not a military expert, right? But you will need at some point you will need fully autonomous weapon systems. For example, they are already deployed in air defense. You cannot have an effective air defense which is not autonomous, because you simply don't have the time for human decisions. You will have a human on the loop, which means like they can trying to stop something if it's happening, but you will not have a human in the loop, which means like he has to green light something before something happens. That's it. In some areas you won't have that. And if we look at the how the war changes, also you see it in the Ukraine right now. Much more is done, for example, with drones. It comes down to speed. We will move to points where there is only one way if you want to be effective. Plus, some of our adversaries do not have our ethical constraints, so we need to also see what we can do about it. And then it also may come down to electrical EMP jamming or something, or also hacking their drones. So there is a point where we might have to talk about autonomous systems also in the military context, or what to do, or at least what to do about them when our enemies have that. The second point is, because you mentioned it twice already, so I want to jump on that. Innovation of going to market, and then the problem with security. Fully agree. And the particular problem with machine learning or AI software in that regard is that you cannot simply patch it. If you have conventional software, there's a vulnerability, you can write a patch or bug fix, and it gets updated. You have these auto updates, and then they're secure again, right? You cannot do that with machine learning powered software. You can try to make it forget. You can try to put guardrails in, which means like you're not allowed, for example, with large language models, you're not allowed to anymore to ask certain things. You can try to retrain them, the models, but ultimately there's a significant difference from a security point of view, what you can do with conventional software to patch them if there's a vulnerability, and what you cannot do anymore with machine learning powered software when there's a vulnerability. Not a lot of research has been done on it, as far as I know, but that's something that we have to drill down, because that will significantly impact our security from the machine learning perspective. And then finally, come back to your point. Ed, let me phrase it in a positive way, because I wanted to make that earlier already. So what's the opportunity for the Philippines, for example, or for any country for that matter is, in terms of machine learning, the data that you have and how you handle it is extremely important. Of course, you need to protect it at all costs. Maybe not at all costs, but you have to protect your data, the data of your citizens, and it's super important. And you have to find a way to use it if you want to develop your own machine learning powered software. And then comes to the step that I wanted to make, which is a niche maybe. You have to look at what kind of data you have that competing governments may not have. That's something that is a niche for your country, because that's where you could, for example, together with industry partners, build AI-powered solutions that might help other countries as well, where you can find like something that you can put on the market. There's a lot of thought process that gets into that, but because we know that computing power is needed, good algorithms are needed, and particularly data sets are needed. The data set is something that you might have as your gold mine, so to say, for certain cases. But on the downside, as you just mentioned, of course, if you have large amounts of data, you have to govern them well. You have to protect them. You have to secure them. You have to tell your citizens what you will do with them. We have currently a debate here in Germany about health data. We want to digitize it. We want to do all this kind of digital medical stuff. But the downside is like, how do you treat that data, and what happens if it gets compromised, it gets all on the internet, and everyone knows your health history? That's not great. So to maybe at the last point move again to your I was still won by bullets. I do think so, but there's a case to be made for other things as well. But if I would be interested to sway certain opinions, for example, and I'm a government, a foreign government, I could, for like I think $100 per piece or so, I could start having a mercenary, fully legitimate company. Well, I don't think it's ethical, but they're legitimate, to hack the iPhones of your senators, of your congressmen, and give me the data that they're currently looking at, their laptops. It really doesn't cost a lot. It goes through a professional company. Most of the times it's a fairly company in that matter, in that regard. And for that few bucks, you get the data and access to the systems of high-profile politicians. And then, it's your creativity what you do with the data. You can hack and leak it, so to say. You put it on the internet just before the elections. You can ask for ransom. You can blackmail the politicians and their party members. Sky's the limit. What you do with that, and that's maybe the thing that is more where you get more bang for the buck, so to say, or at least where you perceive that you have a very direct impact for very few money abusing digital tools.
By the way,
But
just a quick reply to Sven, Ed. What he was
yeah,
describing, the scenario, the last part, no, about the legitimate mercenary company. He was describing a real scenario, by the way, except for the part where it only costs that much. When that scenario became real, we are still talking about bespoke technologies costing millions of dollars. But theoretically, okay, theoretically at least, the cost now has gone down, right? But that technology is already existing. And it exists by way of a German company, two Israeli companies, and one Italian company. And it's well documented, in fact, by a think tank called Citizen Labs in the University of Toronto, which was the first to uncover that it was actually being used by certain governments against their own citizens and not against terrorists. So yes, uh, the scenario earlier described by Sven is already very real, although theoretically the cost may be can be, of course, subject of debate. But yes, it is true. As to the earlier question, whether wars will still be won by bullets, um, Sven mentioned about the war in Ukraine, and if there's anything that the war in Ukraine and to some extent the Israeli offensive against Hamas has demonstrated, uh, cyber warfare in its fullest sense hasn't manifested yet. What we are seeing is still some cyber in warfare, okay? Which means that any conventional engagement right now involving nations and nations or state actors versus non-state actors will always be preceded by some activity in cyberspace. Uh, you could liken it to uh, prior to a massive launch attack, you will have first an artillery barrage, you have catapults, you have arrows, you have cannons preceding a launch of a ground offensive. For now, the counterpart of that is already happening in cyberspace. So, to your question, is it I think bullets and boots on the ground will still win wars today, but there will be some aspect of cyber in our warfare in today's age.
oh man. Well, anyway, I didn't even notice that we've spent almost an hour already talking about it. No? So again, I'm sure I will be asking the both of you again to talk about something more specific. At least this episode has allowed us, no, an opportunity to introduce the issue to the public, especially to the Philippine public. I got scared with so much of what Sven mentioned earlier, particularly in trying to get to, our leaders and policymakers. Uh, Alam mo, medyo kulang na nga tayo sa mga nag-iisip eh. And I'm sure, of course, Sven understands what I just said in the vernacular. How much more if there will be this kind of attack, Kong Ace, my goodness. It's a good thing that when we thought of organizing peers, even before us having to actually find a reason to use our capacity, for the purpose that we're talking about now, simula pa lang the ethical part is already set. No? But of course, we are also aware that in the process of doing it, it need not necessarily suggest that the other side would be ethical. So let me end by asking the both of you at least parting words. I'll ask Sven first because my question to you, Kong Ace, is I have to say really very, very, very Philippines. No? So Sven, I've been keeping track of course, as I've said, we're friends, and I've been keeping track of your activities there and so on and so forth. Uh, the governments around the world, of course, are pretty much busy with the same thing, governance and so on and so forth. What has been the critical contribution of the government, so to speak, both in the realm of development of AI and in controlling AI? And which country, to your mind, no, has is ahead, no, in this regard, so that at least we'll have an idea coming from from a developing country like the Philippines, know what we can do. So at least the way you see it, what has governments done and what still needs to be done?
So I admit I don't have a very good overview of what the People's Republic of China is doing right now. But what I can tell you from US and EU perspective is that the US, as a matter of maybe a hands-off approach on certain things, has enabled their industry, which is already has been the leading tech industry in the world for years now anyway, to also become the leading industry on AI development. I mean, they can drive the rules. There's like Lawrence Lessig once said, "Code is law," and basically they're driving many of the rules by the development through the industry partners. So the government has the advantage of having those industries in their country, which means they can have national regulations regulating them very easily and coordinate and cooperate with them. But the industry is actually the really important stakeholder and actor in this matter. And then if you look over the pond to the European Union, which is not, of course, a country, but a group of countries, if you want, the European Union has done what it can do really well. It's leveraging its purchasing power by saying, hey, we as a European Union regulate. We did that with data protection. We did that with IT security. And now we're doing that with AI. And only if you follow the regulations that we put out for the EU, you can sell and buy your stuff here. Which means we are using it as purchasing power as a group of states that you have together and not alone to force the industry, maybe hopefully also a bit from the US, to adapt to those standards. We have seen it happening with the data protection, and I hope we see it happening with IT security and later on with AI algorithms and the software that comes out of it. And these are the two approaches that we've seen in that realm that seem to be rather successful or effective, I would say.
I was just about to ask, but you already answered it. No, that if so much is with the private sector, again, the government would always be playing second. Second to what the private sector is doing? But I suppose there's no other way to go around it. My question to you, Kong, is by way of conclusion, is if we are to ask our policy leaders, or perhaps I should ask, uh, what do we look for with with the midterm elections coming? No, can you at least give us some? Can you recommend what to look for? With the policy leaders that we have to elect, because I'm sorry, if before at least we can see a semblance of debate and policy, was this sense and intelligence, now it's gone haywire, no, yung political dynasty na problema natin before, parang yun na yung hindi lang standard, talagang it's pushed to the limits, no? So if we are to advise our individual voters, our public for that matter, how can we uh, help our policy leaders? Perhaps how can we ask them to talk about this issue so that we will be better off moving forward, and that we can, from our end, from us as a voter, we will be able to choose who's the right person to vote for. Your
Difficult question to answer, Ed, no? But let me answer it this way. I wish that I could say that the majority of uh, our elected leaders uh, would be driving the kind of policy changes that will ultimately catapult us to a better position, even insofar as, science and technology is concerned. What I see is the more realistic scenario is that there are bright spots in Congress, whether in the House or in the Senate. There are also bright spots in the bureaucracy. And these bright spots should, I think, be our beacons. We cannot expect it to be a large scale effort, a top to bottom thing that will happen. What is a more realistic scenario is that there is it starts with a voice in the wilderness, and hopefully that voice in the wilderness gets noticed, and hopefully it gets support from the bright spots in the bureaucracy, because as you are very well familiar with our policymaking process, even Congress, despite its imperious tendencies, will still have to rely on the bureaucracy and even on industry for input into legislation and policymaking. And especially if it's in the case of science and technology, I think they will really have to rely on these bright spots. So I will not I will not I am willing to bet, in fact, Ed, no, that this elections next year will not change the landscape so much. So I will revert back to that scenario about bright spots. And when it comes to again, I'll go back to my earlier point about India. So I'm looking at there's a very good technology tracker or index maintained by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and they have been monitoring certain technologies, and the leading countries, the top 5 countries that are leading in these technologies, specifically in the area of AI, computing, and communications. So we're talking about advanced radio frequency communications, that's 5G and 6G, advanced optical communications, artificial intelligence and hardware accelerators, distributed ledgers, that's blockchain, and advanced data analytics, as well as machine learning and protective cybersecurity technologies. All of those that I mentioned, Ed, they are all being led by China. And there's a high probability of technology monopoly, specifically in 5G and 6G technologies by China. In all of those technologies that I mentioned, the US only ranks second. It only ranks first in high performance computing, with China fast catching up. However, what is surprising, among the top 5 countries across all of those technologies that I mentioned, in all of those technologies except one, in high performance computing, India either ranks third, fourth, or fifth. Now, why do I mention this? Remember the earlier story I told you about India voluntarily relinquishing the number one position in
Yeah.
voice call seats to the
Uh-huh.
Philippines. That specific shift, that mindful shift that India undertook to move up to high value services, for example, in software, okay, that has now paid dividends for them in terms of this ranking of theirs. And I think we need to make those similar changes in our policy making, in our education, and in our R&D spending, if we are to make as much of the strides that India has made. Of course, we're talking about a country of billions of people. We also have a large human capital pool, and so maybe we can start looking at it from that perspective. And I also especially like the perspective offered earlier by Sven about where our country could focus on, especially in the large pool of cybersecurity manpower that is needed, not just across the world, but even here in the Philippines.
You know, I cannot thank you guys enough because I am sure
Good.
we will see each other more because of this episode, Ben. I'm able to understand what kind of work we should be doing, really, not only as peers but as our individual selves, particularly in making sure that not only the Philippines but particularly the individuals that actually use AI and use technology actually use it to their advantage and not only become subjects of different and often conflicting interests. You see, at the end of the day, we are always vulnerable if we do not keep on learning. If machines can be learning over and over again, if machines can develop, machines are developed and created by men, by us. Perhaps it's not a question of us catching up with the machines, but us making sure that the machines are subject to us and not the other way around. But on the other hand, it is always a question again of laziness. It's always a question again of resilience. And it's always a question of purpose. Unless we're able to maintain all those, whether or not we're Filipino, whether or not we're fighting for a particular territory, whether or not we are being bullied or otherwise, it wouldn't matter anymore. Because at the end of the day, we ourselves have already given up. We at Peers will not be giving up. And hopefully through our episodes every weekend, we will be able to continue informing you, not only in terms of AI, not only in terms of the very issues that we deal with every day, but more so in terms of empowering every individual in us. With that, magandang umaga po and salamat sa pagpanood at pakikinig sa amin. Okay, thank you. Let me check.
Recording stopped.
Okay, good. Thank you,
Thank
JC,
you.
for
Kung
introducing
Ace,
Yes, Jace.
kape tayo nila Prof. Ed next time. Coffee tayo next